Good afternoon and welcome to the Wilson Center and to today's meeting on Tunisia and the Arab Malaise. I'm Malaise. I run the Middle East program at the center. We are delighted to have with us this afternoon two senior scholars at the center and two experts on the region. To my left, Ambassador Alan Golty, and to my right, David Ottaway. When we discussed holding this meeting last week with Alan and David, we were not sure whether the Tunisian uprising will be still relevant today, but not only it's relevant, but it is spreading. So while we will get a sense of what happened and where we are going from here. We have distributed the bios, and I'm sure you picked up some of the bios. Ambassador Alan Golty is a senior scholar at the center and the former British ambassador to Tunisia. He retired in 2008 after 40 years in the British diplomatic service, including posting as ambassador to Tunisia from 2004 to 2008 and in the Sudan from 1995 to 1999. And I think I'll stop here and let you look at the bios later. To my right, David Ottaway is a senior scholar at the Wilson Center, and he's a former Cairo bureau chief for the Washington Post, having spent most of his professional life as a foreign correspondent and national security and investigative reporter for the Post. We have copies of his latest paper, which was published as part of the Middle East program's occasional paper series. It's Egypt at the tipping point, very relevant to what's going on in Egypt now. Ambassador, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I'm glad to see so many people here, including a number of distinguished Tunisians, and I'll do my best to provoke them a little. I want to say a word about three questions, not descriptive of Tunisia, but more analytical. The first one is, why was this intifada, if I can use the expression, not seen coming, at least by most Western observers? Second question is, why were Western pressures for democratization and human rights in Tunisia so ineffective, pressures such as they were? And thirdly, a word about the outlook, because this process is still at the beginning, it's far from over. So why did we not predict this development? The analysis, I think, was good and had been good for a long time. When I arrived in Tunis in 2004, I found in the files a cable from my predecessor, but one, addressed, though I'd forgotten it, to myself, explaining what the problems were very clearly and cogently. In 2009, as we now know, purported American diplomatic reporting, purported, I understand, as State Department speak for the WikiLeaks cables, gave a very accurate picture of what was going on in Tunisia. One might cite, for example, youth unemployment, underemployment in the state service, lack of entrepreneurship, neglect of the interior of the country, very tight, almost unbelievable restrictions on freedom of speech and association, intolerance of any form of opposition, and above all, growing corruption of the family and its consequences for Ben Ali's standing. And yet we did not draw from all this the logical conclusion that trouble was brewing. Or rather, we did draw the conclusion. One of the first things my wife said to me after we'd been in Tunisia for a month was, when is this place going to blow? Well, that was 6 years ago. And I think the problem is that though you can analyze and come to a conclusion and say that, as Richard Haas did about the American deficits in the Financial Times, the question is not if it will blow, but when. So that was the challenge. And analysts, as you probably know, have a natural tendency to go for the safe prediction. And the safe prediction in political analysis is that tomorrow will bring more of what we've got today. And that's what people tend to say. And 70% of the time, that's perfectly safe prediction, spot on, and you're congratulated for your perspicacity and acumen. You can qualify that as Bob Godek did, but the conclusion tends to be that the problem you're dealing with will be managed, the characters will continue to muddle through. Because you can't easily foresee the sort of trigger for violence and upset that one found in Tunisia with the suicide of that poor man in Sidi Bouzid. For those of you who don't know Sidi Bouzid, I say that you can hardly imagine a more God-forsaken little town in winter with no attractions in the middle of Tunisia and nothing to do. And the story of Mohamed Bouaziz, I think, touched a nerve among Tunisians. It combined the despair of unemployment, especially for the young, with the petty police brutality that people had perhaps got used to, but had certainly not grown to like. And the combination provoked an upsurge of emotion with the results that we all know. In defense of the analysts, one ought also to say that Tunisia seemed to all appearances to be doing pretty well. If Ben Ali's bargain, as people used to say, was eat and shut up, there wasn't much overt challenge to that. I think somebody quoted the other day the old story of the Tunisian dog, sleek and well-fed in the 1990s, who slipped over the border into Algeria. And there he met a starving cur of an Algerian dog who said, "What the hell are you doing over here?" And the Tunisian said, "I wanted to bark." And that was the position that Tunisians were in. But the positive side of the bargain, Ben Ali did deliver, and I can go into a sort of spiel I used to say to visitors to Tunis over the last few years. There was 5% growth annually over a period of 20 years. The tourism, the assembly of goods for European markets, and the energy sectors were all improved and doing well. By regional standards, provision of utilities, health, education, pensions were excellent. There was, it's true, unemployment, officially around 14%, but probably rather more, especially among the young. But even that and the youth unemployment was not apparently as bad in the medium to long term as in many other parts of the Arab world, because the birth rate was falling, birth control is permitted, even encouraged in Tunisia, and primary school enrollment, reflecting that, is down. So it seemed unlikely that this youth unemployment problem would be as explosive as potentially maybe elsewhere. And finally, in defense of the analysis, the people who should have known what was going on, the Tunisian authorities, also got it wrong. I lose count of the number of times a senior Tunisian told me not to worry about this or that human rights question that I happen to be raising. We know best, Ambassador, how to run things. We've got our finger on the pulse. We know it all. And it seemed that they didn't have. I think one reason for that was that they were absolutely obsessed with the Islamist threat. I bore something of the brunt of this among diplomatic colleagues because Mr. Ghanouchi, the leader of Ennahda, was a political asylee in London, had been since the early 90s, and the Tunisians used to find it convenient to blame me for anything he might be supposed to have said or done. But with their eye on that particular threat, it seems to me that they had absolutely no idea of the growing disgust at the rapaciousness of especially the First Lady's family. It was a classic case of nobody telling the emperor that he's wearing no clothes. I don't think anybody told Ben Ali what the word was on the streets, even though he had hundreds and hundreds of policemen in cafes and mosques and street corners trying to find out. The strict control of the press was, even by the most stringent East European or Arab standards, extraordinary. After we'd been in Tunisia for, I think, 4, maybe 6 weeks, my wife and I were reading the newspapers over breakfast, and Lillian said to me, "You didn't tell me there'd been a coup." And I said, I don't think there has been a coup. Why, what gives you that impression? She said, well, there's no picture of Ben Ali on the front page. And it was like that, unbelievably controlled the press. If we put out from the embassy a press release on any subject, it was whether it was printed or not, it had nothing to do with the quality of the writing or the newsworthiness of the story. It was all to do with whether I happened to be in favour with the government, or Britain happened to be in favour of the government on that particular day. So there wasn't, as there probably is in a country like Egypt, subject to what David may want to say, the safety valve effect of the press, but also the warning. And I noticed I think it was in Time magazine, reported a claim by the Mosaic radio station editorial staff that on about the last day they felt obliged to print something reporting what was going on and the growing criticism of the president. Last day, I mean the last day before the president left. And I'm inclined to think Mosaic is owned by members of the family. So that was possibly the first intimation the president had that people were really getting fed up where he stood. Why else would he have scuttled so quickly? Maybe it was because the army refused to use live ammunition on the demonstrators. Maybe, perhaps more likely, it was a failure of nerve by the First Lady and her family, who for years had taken precautions and to have passports stuffed with appropriate visas and bolt holes prepared. I doubt if they prepared a trip to Mecca for the purpose, but sometimes even the best laid plans of mice and men gang agley. Second question, why weren't we more effective in pressures for democratization and human rights? I'm afraid we have to say that we didn't try very hard. Embassies, in my experience, by and large, did try quite hard. The subject was on our agenda for EU ambassadors' meetings regularly. We all, in our different ways, took up these subjects with the Tunisians, and we made little progress. I'm not sure I have a good answer to this, but I'll share some thoughts from somebody who was at the not very sharp end. Firstly, we have to admit, till I saw this crowd today, that in the West there was a lack of interest in Tunisia. On the whole, there weren't senior level visitors. If there were, it was tacked on to a visit to the more lucrative markets of Algeria or the more friendly or easy places like Morocco. I think I saw 2 British ministers in just over 4 years, and that for very brief visits. We were complacent. Tunisia looked not just to be small and not of very great importance, but moderate with generally satisfactory policies, especially in foreign affairs and counter-terrorism. The influence in foreign affairs of Tunisia can be exaggerated. I remember once asking my Egyptian colleague, who'd been in post for about 3 years, whether she was not inundated with reports from Cairo and the Arab League wanting to know what the Tunisians thought and were there going to be a swing vote. And she looked at me as though I was completely crazy and said, "You must be joking. Cairo have never asked me any question at all about what's going on in Tunisia." So it wasn't only the West who thought that Tunis could be left to go on as it was. And of course, we, to a greater extent, France, Italy, Spain, had extensive commercial and other interests in Tunis and weren't about to rock the boat. We shared Tunisian antipathy to Islamic extremists and saw them as being on the right side of that particular battle. Tunisian cooperation, I have to say, left a great deal to be desired, but nevertheless they were, broadly speaking, on the right side. And of course, the Tunisians never ceased to remind us that the alternatives to the existing regime were worse. Either the very, very weak opposition or the very, very nasty Islamists. And I have to say also that diplomats were not immune from the sort of harassment that the Tunisian police and security authorities meted out to their own dissidents. Several members of my staff found that intruders had been into their house when they were out, detected that by obvious signs like locked doors being unlocked, water left running in the bath, that sort of thing, just to let us know that eyes were on us. The French intelligence representative had his car trashed in the street. By say trash, I don't mean it was an accident. I mean it was trashed when he was not present. The Spanish intelligence representative was expelled. So there was a constant. I'm not saying it put us off. It didn't put us off, and my staff, who were personally threatened, were very good at carrying on and doing their jobs as they should have done. But still, it was a nasty atmosphere. We did take care to be in touch with human rights activists, opposition leaders. I used to meet them regularly at the house for lunch. In fact, if I'd ever forgotten a lunch engagement with a human rights activist, I was always reminded by the fact that the police presence outside the gate was trebled in order to protect me from my guest. So that was a sign as I left to go to work that I had somebody coming to lunch. So I think, in short, the sort of tool that we had under the EU association agreement with Tunisia, which on the face of it was productive in helping develop the Tunisian economy, that sort of tool didn't seem right. It was sort of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, if you like, for the relatively good performance of the Tunisian regime. And I don't think our capitals really wanted to field a barrage of questions saying, why are you taking measures or sanctions against Tunisia when, and you can name 5 or 6 countries in the immediate vicinity, are so much worse? Of course, the consequence is that as things develop in Tunisia, we may come to be seen collectively or individually as having been over-friendly to Ben Ali. The French embrace at the time, I remember Sarkozy's first overseas visit was to Tunisia, was extremely warm, and embrace was certainly the order of the day. And I noticed with some alarm that the tear gas canisters fired against the demonstrators in the last few weeks are stamped made in the USA. So there will be lessons to be drawn, and I think most of Western governments will be taking another look at relations with other regimes, not only in the Middle East, with less than perfect human rights records. So what's the outlook? We're in the middle of a very difficult situation, and you're not going to get any insightful prophecy from me. But I think one thing is clear, that the Ben Ali bargain I described is going to be reversed, if you like, to read something like, speak up, but tighten your belts. There will be much more political space. It's very difficult to imagine that the freedom being tasted by the media and by the ordinary person in the street is going to be reversed quickly. But it comes, I think, at the expense of short-term economic difficulties. The Ben Ali family, extraordinary though it seems, controlled about half or more of the Tunisian private sector. That is now left, for at least in the short term, leaderless and directionless. And, of course, there will be consequences for employment and so on, unless somebody can get a grip of that problem business by business. Tunisia's credit rating has already been downgraded. Tourists have flocked out of the country, and the tourist sector is very important. As you probably know, most Tunisian businesses are family-owned, family-run, family with a small f, not meaning Ben Ali's family, and diverse, so that if the olive crop has a bad year, you can recoup on your car dealership or your hotel and so on. So there's a wide stake in the tourist industry, which certainly in the short term has been badly damaged. Even if the economy were doing well, as we all know, it's not easy to create a lot more jobs. I thought one of the first signs that Ben Ali really was losing it was his statement that he was about to create 300,000 new jobs after 23 years of having failed to do anything like that. It seems so wildly unrealistic as to be a sign of the end. The new government, I think, announced yesterday that unemployment benefit would be paid at the rate of 150 dinars a month to those unemployed. That's all very well, but as we know perfectly well from our own experience, these sort of things have to be paid for, and it's not clear that an economy in difficulties is going easily to be able to find the money to do that. In any case, the recovery will depend on the confidence of investors, both foreign and Tunisian, to look again at Tunisia as a safe haven for funds and investment. From the Tunisian side, one of my strongest impressions of 4 years in Tunisia was their aversion to risk. And I can illustrate that by an observation of the Soccer World Cup in 2008. The Tunisians had not done very well in their first two games, but had a chance of going through to the next round if they won their last match. So you would have thought the conclusion would be that you had to attack as vigorously as you could. The Tunisian selection for that match, you know that in soccer you have 11 on a team, was one goalkeeper, pretty well obligatory, 9 midfielders, and 1 attacker.
It was a French.
I'm sorry. Could I ask you not to?
It's you know, you're absolutely right. It was a French coach, but he was so steeped in Tunisian tradition. And the Tunisians did take the risk of sacking him when they failed to win the game. But the lone attacker, poor chap, was given a red card when he fouled somebody in sheer desperation after about 20 minutes. And after that, the Tunisian team played extremely well and held the opposition for the best part of the game. But, of course, in the end, lost. But if you think about it, the goalkeeper is a very obvious position. If the ball goes in, he let it in. You can't deny that. Up front, attacker is also very risky because the ball comes to you in front of the goal and you miss, everybody sees you missed. But in the midfield, you know, if I miss a pass or somebody slips past me, it was probably because Haller wasn't in position. You know, it's that sort of thing. You can't pin it so easily on somebody. And I think that this is my provocative bit. I've only got one shout so far, but this I really think will hold Tunisia back. It's a real risk. On the political side, one can see three broad groupings. One is the old regime. Now, that doesn't mean Ben Ali's family or the RCD necessarily under that name, because the rats are scuttling faster than one's ever seen off that particular ship. But those Tunisians with a stake in the old regime and a part in it are very many. And those who do not want to be DRCD'd, as the Iraq was de-Baathified, are going to be very many. The RCD claimed 2 million members. And even if one assumes that lots of them joined in order to safeguard their jobs or their children's education and so on, nevertheless, that's an awful lot of Tunisians, something like, if you eliminate the children, something like 25%, with a stake in the government. There were as many police in Tunisia as there are in France, which has 6 times the population. So imagine how many Tunisians have a policeman in the family. Of course, a lot of Tunisians were harassed by the police and had to pay petty bribes to a traffic policeman and so on. Worse if you were in the opposition. But an awful lot of Tunisians were policemen or related to policemen. So there's going to be whether or not one posits a survival of the Ben Ali Presidential Guard, one report said that some of them have taken refuge in Libya. Whether or not that's true, there's going to be a conservative, let's not change too much movement coming. Secondly, you have the opposition, new freedom to organize. They have got leaders, but they haven't got grassroots, rank-and-file organization and support. And they're working on that urgently. But it's impossible at this stage to know whether they will pull together effectively enough to form the post-election government. And then there's the Islamists who were brutally suppressed in the 1990s, played no part in the Intifada, but are going to take advantage, are trying to take advantage. There's already words that they'll revive the old students' union they used to run, the newspaper Al-Fajr, bring back Ghanouchi, make that an occasion for demonstration, and their leaders being interviewed are taking the line that they've matured in opposition and exile and absorbed Western values. So the outcome of the election is very uncertain, in my view. I wouldn't exclude chaos. Of course, from our point of view, greater political freedom is warmly to be welcomed. But there's still the question mark of whether the government warnings in my day were right, and the Islamist danger may give us more than we really want to welcome. In short, one cannot yet say that Tunisia is a model to be followed elsewhere in the Arab world.
Thank you very much, Alan. David?
First things that really strikes me about Tunisia's role today is that I think it's the first time that I can remember in 20 years, since '88, that anything happening in the Maghreb had any relevance to the rest of the Arab world. You have to go back to what happened in Algeria and similar riots in 1988 to think of something that happened in the Maghreb that's had any impact on the rest of the Arab world. My second comment is that I think it's had a tremendous psychological impact on the whole Arab world and been an incredible morale booster to downtrodden human rights and pro-democracy groups that have really been at the brunt of the police states across the Arab world. So it's really a bright spot on the horizon that all the pro-democracy groups are grabbing onto, and maybe will energize the entire region. Now, what has been its impact so far? It's difficult to be precise, but I think there's somewhere around 12 examples of self-immolation in Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria, Mauritania, and Saudi Arabia. And Mauritania and Saudi Arabia is really quite extraordinary because we've never seen anything like that at all in those two countries. We've had riots, demonstrations, or protests in Algeria, Jordan, Egypt, Mauritania, Yemen, and even Oman, where government employees got out on the street the other day, about 2,000 of them, mostly government employees, to protest over low wages. Yemeni students are organizing now and have been holding demonstrations in ways we've never seen before. And then we have Cairo today. What a day to be meeting to discuss the impact of Tunisia on the rest of the Arab world. Cairo today has just been an incredibly exciting place, as a journalist anyway, to even watch. And Al-Ahram newspaper, which is a government newspaper, has been reporting hour by hour and even minute by minute what's been going on in the country, but particularly in Cairo. And I just want to give you a few samples to give a sense of. So they say this is local time, local Cairo. 3:23, very precise. More than 1,000 protesters are demonstrating in Mahala Shan Square. In Giza, thousands are now marching from Da'i, where we lived when we were in Cairo, to Tahrir Square. Al-Ahram online reporter has spotted at least 12 armored vehicles speeding from Ramesses Square heading towards Abdin Square. 3:30 p.m., thousands in Atabar are chanting against the interior minister and the president. This is a government newspaper reporting this. I mean, for anybody who knows, this is the last thing I would expect from the government newspaper. Clashes in Shubra, another district of Cairo. Police use water cannons against protesters in downtown Cairo. The Da'i protesters, this is 3:44 p.m. The Da'i protesters have arrived in Tahrir. 3:48, police set up barricades in Shubra. It goes on and on and on like this. Reports that there are up to 20,000 people protesting in Alexandria. And then it goes on all the way up to, the last entries, 7:10, 6 o'clock p.m. Cairo time. Groups regroup to maintain occupation. Tahrir Square is absolutely dead center Cairo. Crowds regroup to maintain occupation of Tahrir Square as a heavy presence of Central Security Forces cordons off Qasr al-Aini Street, which is one of the streets going into the square. 7:10 p.m., Central Security Forces ring protesters outside the High Court of Ramesses Street. 7:46, police fire tear gas at protesters in City Gabr and Alexandria. 8 o'clock, an easy calm prevails in Tahrir Square as both security forces and protesters hold their positions. 9 o'clock, protesters dispersed in front of the High Court of Ramesses Street. 9:30 p.m., this is the first time I've seen this. 2 protesters are reported dead in Suez and 1 Central Security Forces soldier in Cairo. First deaths reported for the whole day. 9:35 p.m., clashes between police and protesters in Alexandria. The Corniche Road there is open. But it gives you the sense of this incredible day in Cairo that Al-Ahram at least allows you to feel the sense of through their reporting minute by minute of what's been going on there. Now, what has been the impact of all this of Tunisia on the minds of Arab governments and leaders? You may or may not know it, but prices for key food items and gasoline have been going up across the Arab world. And governments have been under a lot of pressure to cut subsidies. Well, those plans are almost uniformly everywhere now been scraped. And I want to give you a few examples of what's been happening. Jordan cut the cost of fuel on 13 items, including basics like sugar, rice, and milk. Yemen reduced taxes on businesses and individuals. President Saleh decreed a salary hike of $47 to $234 a month for all civil servants and soldiers. The Algerian government rushed to buy 1.4 million tons of wheat abroad to assure food supplies for the rest of the coming months, the rest of the year. Kuwait announced that it's giving all citizens $3,500 grant in cash and free food staples for 13 months in advance of the celebration of the country's 50th anniversary this June. Libya has acted to control price increases. But perhaps even more interesting is what some of the Arab leaders have been saying about all this. Amr Moussa, who's the Secretary General of the Arab League, quote, "It's on everybody's mind that the Arab soul is broken by poverty, unemployment, and a general slide in indicators." That's social indicators. He warns of big social shocks ahead. Quote, "The Arab citizen has entered a stage of anger that is unprecedented." Mubarak, without mentioning Tunisia, "We are not isolated from the world with its problems, challenges, and crises." Mohammed El-Baradei, who hopes to become president one day of Egypt, and the former IEA head, "Regime change in Egypt is inevitable." Quote, "If the Tunisians have done it, Egyptians should get there too." Then Gaddafi, who was a big supporter of Ben Ali and still is, "I do not only hope that he stays until 2004, but for life." He says this after Ben Ali's left. He says he still considers Ben Ali the, quote, "legal president of Tunisia under the Constitution." I think Gaddafi's going to be real trouble because he has a record of supporting. He was involved in an attempt to overthrow the government of Sudan in 1976, and he actually allowed the rebels to form in his country and march into the Sudan to try to overthrow Numeri. So I wouldn't be surprised that that he gets involved in helping these people that have fled the security forces, the Ben Ali security forces, to Libya, that he helps them regroup and do something to try and get back into power. Sudan's ruling National Congress Party, a senior official, quote, "We in Sudan do not fear a repeat of the Tunisian experience because we have been through the election process." More on that later. Yemen's president, quote, "Yemen is not like Tunisia, where people were not allowed to enter mosques without IDs. Yemen is a country of freedom and democracy, but we warn of chaos and demagogy." But he has backed away now of talking or even suggesting that he's trying to shoehorn his son into to becoming the next president after he leaves. So already there's concrete indication that Saleh, who's been there for 32 years, may be reconsidering whether he's going to run again or not. He's trying to get the Constitution changed now so that he could run. Questions still to be asked about all this. Are conditions ripe elsewhere for a combined social political explosion a la Tunisienne? Outsiders almost unanimously would say, yes, they are ripe, and they've been ripe for a long time. But we have to realize the reaction so far we haven't had any more Tunisians. And the question is it a question of time? Are there very different circumstances in each country that are going to make it less possible to see more Tunisians? I mean, after all, we've seen self-immolations in Algeria, Mauritania, and even Egypt, and we haven't really even today seen a social explosion. Another cyberspace reaction has been huge and widespread. But there's still a big distance between cyberspace, all the bloggers, and the street. And maybe the gap is closing now. Maybe that's what we saw in Egypt today. I'm not sure. We don't quite know who all was involved in the demonstrations today, which, by the way, involves probably 40,000 people if you take all across the country. And it's true that Alexandria, there were 20,000. But pro-democracy and human rights groups still have shallow roots in Arab society and not big followings. And they're the ones really leading the crusade, and the question is whether they can link up with to the unemployed and the people in the street complaining about the price of food and sort of the cost of living, and can they connect to the economic discontent? I don't know. You have to look at the specifics of each Arab country, and I want to leave some time here so I'm going to be quick. There are two countries that immediately come to mind: Algeria, because they've already been through this. I don't think Algeria is going to blow, and I'll tell you why, or at least I'll give you a couple of reasons. The Algerian security services keep a record of every demonstration protest that happens across the country. Last year, they recorded 11,500 disturbances in the country. 11,500. And so they kind of become commonplace. They're not different enough the way they were in Tunisia to really cause the whole place to blow up. Another one is the Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is in the government, unlike Egypt, where the government has just even driven them out of parliament. The Muslim Brotherhood in Algeria is actually part of the three-party coalition supporting the government, and they've been in government supporting the president, Bouteflika, and they've been in government since 1995. Egypt, what's going to happen there? In many ways, it would look like it's another Tunisia waiting to happen. And it's become even more restrictive politically. In the elections in November, December, they drove the Muslim Brotherhood that had 88 seats out of parliament. Now the Muslim Brotherhood has no seats. So you get a sense of a real political pressure cooker existing on the banks of the Nile. But on the other hand, there are other things you have to weigh against that. There's absolutely a massive police and security apparatus. And the army and the security forces seem to be totally loyal to the state and Mubarak so far. Then there are other issues affecting Egyptian society. I'm thinking of the Christian Muslim sectarian issue, and the fact that both Muslim leaders and Christian leaders right now are really trying to tamp down the tensions of society because they've had a number of very serious incidents. So you have countervailing forces trying to calm things down rather than to make work towards any kind of a explosion, social explosion in the country. Finally, Egyptian masses are they're incredibly apolitical. I wrote a series of articles in 1985 when I was leaving Egypt, and it's a 4-part series in the Washington Post. And I described how terrible conditions were in Egypt and what Cairo was like in the streets and the social conditions, and quoted people saying this place is in terrible political and economic shape and trouble is on the horizon. That's 1985, and nothing happened for 25 years. So I'm always hesitant to conclude that we're now on the verge of a revolution, having thought that we were on a verge of a revolution in 1985. You have to be careful about Egypt. There's this mass of Egyptians that seem to be incredibly apolitical. Quickly, so what's high on my list for possible explosion? I still have to put Egypt up there 25 years later. Yemen, maybe. But I think we have to think about the Sudan, which is also an Arab country. It had a street revolution in 1964, and they threw out the military. They have labor unions, they have Communist Party, they have well-established political parties that go back to the time of even before independence, and they have a tradition of taking to the streets. In fact, in 1985, when Jafar Numeri was president, and I had just come back from Egypt, and I actually interviewed. I think I had the last interview with Numeri before he was overthrown. He was in the embassy here in Washington, and he was railing and berating our coverage because we had a correspondent in Khartoum, And he was telling about these incredible street demonstrations getting bigger and bigger, and Nameri was telling me it's not true. Why are you giving so much attention to what's going on? Well, Nameri left to go back. He got as far as Cairo, and he never returned. He was overthrown, and a civilian government came in. So Sudan has a tradition of taking to the streets, of seeing vast numbers of people take to the streets, and it's got incredible problems. It's being divided in two. It's going to lose its oil resources. You know, it's about to go through a major national trauma. And to me, there are Omar Bashir, the president, is already taking steps to protect himself. He's thrown Hassan Tourabi, who's an Islamist who's caused trouble for him before. He's already thrown him back into jail, and you can see there's a nervousness there. Let me stop there. And
okay. Thank you very much. We have time for a couple of short questions, please. No comment, just questions. Yes, in the back. Please wait for the mic and identify yourself.
Thank you, Alla. I'm Bill Milam from the Wilson Center, and this question is addressed mainly to the ambassador. You know, I don't know Tunisia at all, although I lived next door for a few months in Libya, but it has mystified me in the last few weeks as to where the leadership for these demonstrations and this whole so-called revolution has come from, since as I understand it, the political parties were weak, and that Ben Ali basically made sure that he had no strong opposition either within his party or without, and the Islamists were, you know, put down and sent out. So who's leading? Who led this sort of, if there was, or was this really sort of spontaneous? And if so, then one of your alternatives for future leadership, which is the leaders of the parties.
I'm sorry, thank you. We just have...
Hala, give me another moment, please.
No, I'm afraid not. Yes, please, can I take a second question? My apologies. We really are running out of time.
My name is Stephen Shore. It occurred to me that we really don't have is it possible to develop a predictive model of when unrest would overthrow a state? I think of how the Iran in 1978 struck us by surprise, and the DDR, which was not shy about policing its citizens in 1989. And yet both of these events took people by complete surprise.
Thank you. Let's take these two questions. Alan, please.
I think the answer to the first question is that it was spontaneous and no leader has yet emerged. Maybe this reflects the ability of people to use Facebook and so on to mobilize a crowd fairly quickly. But the big question mark over the future, it seems to me, is precisely whether some leader will emerge who can attract support. And that, of course, is vital when it comes to candidates for the presidential election and so on. As to predictive model, I'm afraid a lifelong skeptic of political science and modeling of that sort. So my answer to that is that no, it's not possible.
Quickly on the second question, when I lived in Zambia, when I was covering what was going on in Rhodesia and the change of governments there, the CIA, I discovered, had made exactly what you're talking about, which is a chart of predictors of likely overthrows of government. Kenneth Kaunda, the president, was high on their list. They had like 20 indicators, and 18 said this guy's going to go. He never went. You can't tell. You just don't know. It is very hard to be predictive about what's the final straw that's going to cause something, a revolution to, or a political upheaval, revolt. I don't know if it's a revolution.
Here and then the young lady. Here. Yes, please.
Yes, I'm Donald Horowitz. I'm a fellow with the Wilson Center. If we don't know who the leaders are, who's in the new government, fill us in with some details on what the shape of this government is, what its relations are with holdovers from the previous regime, whether some sort of amalgam of this kind can last, or whether this is going to look a little bit like a Kerensky's transition to the Bolsheviks.
Thank you. Let's take another question there, too. Yes, very brief, short, please.
Hi, my name is Claire Allenson. I'm a student at SAIS. And my question is just very brief on how do you see the role of youth in terms of inspiring a lot of the unrest because of youth underemployment, and then the use of Twitter, Facebook, and more younger applications, and how that motivated the great.
You go first.
Well, as I understand it, the present Tunisian government is mixed. There are some holdovers from the previous one, maybe 40–50% of the ministers, including the Prime Minister, who has said that he will retire from public life at the elections. And there are also some opposition leaders. Some have been appointed and refused to take part. The Minister of Youth is one of the most prominent bloggers from Tunisia, who has said, we can't get rid of all the old guys because none of us young ones knows how to run a ministry. We've got to have a blend of experience and enthusiasm. But I see this perhaps not as a transition to Bolsheviks, but certainly as transitional. The job of this government is to hold the place together, restore calm, and organize elections. So I think we'll have an entirely new picture in 6 months' time, if all goes well. Youth and enthusiasm have got Tunisia this far, but I think there's going to be a need of some experience and political leadership to build on that, and that's what we don't yet. At least I don't find myself able to identify where that's coming from.
The Minister for Women's Affairs is a former fellow at the Wilson Center. She was a scholar, and this is her first political appointment. And we are all surprised why she decided to join the government at this stage. Her name is Lilia Labidi. Yeah, David, you want to add something about the youth across the region?
Well, I think if you conclude youth going up to the mid-20s and early 30s, yes, because they're the people who have the access to the Twitters and the Facebooks, and this thing in Egypt was very much organized through Facebook and Twitter, and that was also true in Tunisia, keeping it going. Algeria, I don't think it played a big role, because not that many Algerians have computers and Facebooks and Twitters, and so I think you'd have to take it country by country.
The lady here, please. Could you wait for the mic? Yes.
Oh, one thing on Twitter, 4:41 p.m. Twitter service is down in Egypt. Government cut it off.
Yes, please.
Hi, Roxanne Perugino. I wanted to raise a question with Ambassador Golty. You remarked that Tunisians are risk averse. It sort of contradicts what you said, because the revolution was very risky for many Tunisians. So I'm not sure how you want to square that.
Let's take another question in the back, please. Yes, if you just put the mic across the table. Thank you.
I'm Amy Aidawi from Egypt. With what's going on in Egypt today, do you have any advice to the U.S. administration to change its policy towards Mubarak regime, or still more of the same? Thank you.
Well, in answer to the first question, I maintain that Tunisians are basically risk averse. They were provoked in this to come on the streets. It was risky for the individuals. It was brave, but it reflected desperation. But if you look over the years since 1957, there have been an awful lot of times when Tunisians have taken the prudent course and not gone onto the streets. So I don't see Tunisian investors now, and this is the context in which I made the remark, I don't see Tunisian investors now rushing to set up new factories, new jobs, new ventures, new hotels. They're going to be like, and I would be the same. I'd be risk averse in present circumstances.
I don't understand what the U.S. government should do. Well, they've come out today and said, Hillary Clinton came out today and urged restraint, per usual, and urged the government to allow free expression of people marching in the street and no violence and sort of neither nor, trying to be on both sides, but also saying the U.S. government views the Egyptian government as stable. So there was something for everybody. They were clearly on the fence.
In the back, I saw a hand. Yes. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jonah Gold. I'm from Search for Common Ground. And I just wanted to know what role you thought the U.S. and other countries and international partners could have in trying to help Tunisia develop a true democratic system. And, yeah.
And here, please. Yes. Just the gentleman.
My name is Scott Bush. I served in Tunisia with the State Department in the 1960s. Do any of you have any feeling or intelligence on the role of the Army, current, future, in the Tunisian situation?
I think the time has come for a bit of modesty on the part of the West. It's not our job to establish democracy or not in another country. Our track record in Tunisia has not been great in the eyes of those who've led or fomented this intifada. So I think we should stand back, be supportive, yes, but not rush in to try and take control of a sort of Western-led democratic process.
On what outside groups can do, I think at this point is the main problem in Tunisia is going to be backsliding. And we've seen an attempt already to close down one of the radio stations, which was then reversed. So keeping up the pressure and keeping people aware of attempts to backslide and what's happening, and to keep just keeping people informed of what's going on. And if you're in the business of pro-democracy groups, you would keep the pressure on. But I think we have to look for backsliding, and we have to be careful what Gaddafi may try to do to bring back the old regime.
Reverting to the army question, the army in Tunisia is relatively small and not historically politically active. The police and security service is much more numerous and more visible. On the other hand, the army did themselves a power of good by apparently defying Ben Ali's instruction to fire on the demonstrators, and it's possible that the chief of staff, if the opposition parties can't rally around a presidential candidate, might be persuaded to put himself forward. But that's pure speculation at this stage.
Yes, please. Just last two questions here, and yes, gentleman here. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks. Roy Culpepper at the Wilson Center. I wanted to ask a question about economic policy. It seems to me that there's a real dilemma here. If food prices and prices of essentials continue to rise and subsidies are given, there's going to be economic turmoil and bankruptcy down the road. So the dilemma for global institutions, the World Bank and the IMF and so forth, is, how long, which side do you take on this issue? Do you allow governments to cut subsidies and face the consequences, or do you support those who favor, economic harshness on the economic policy side?
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Hazem Al-Gabra. I'm with the Middle East Partnership Initiative, the State Department. And my question to the ambassador, if you were at the embassy today in Tunisia, what would your cable look like when it comes to policy and development funding?
David,
you want me to?
You go first.
I'm really anxious to hear what you're going to say.
You need to think before drafting a cable.
On the economic issue, this has been facing these Arab countries for decades. And when I was there in the early 80s in Egypt, a third of their budget was spent on subsidies. And they're still trying to get rid of subsidies. Yes, it's a really tough issue, and particularly now, because you have shaky political leaders to take the tough economic decisions that everybody's asking them to take. If you're an oil country like Kuwait, you just give everybody $1,000 and free food for a year. I mean, but some of them can't afford that. Jordan, Egypt, and it's going to make it tougher to do, and they're probably not going to do it. They're just going to postpone it until they feel they can take it on. And so it's not good news. But you can't expect leaders to take steps that are going to put themselves out of power. They can get some help, I think, from some of the rich oil countries, Saudi Arabia in the first place, which has close to $400 billion in reserves now. So I think the Jordanians are getting cheaper oil from Iraq. They used to. I don't know if they're gone back to that system or not. So there are ways for other Arab countries to help relieve the pain and face their problems. But no, I don't know what they're going to do. I think it's going to get tougher and tougher.
Did you draft the cable?
Well, you've had the long version of the cable. I don't propose to summarize it for you, but basically supportive of efforts to move towards elections and to maintain the freedoms that have now been won by Tunisians, but caution on the economic front. I don't think any responsible ambassador would counsel investors to get into Tunisia just yet. There are too many uncertainties. If I may, I'd like to just conclude with a risk aversion story. When I was calling on the rector of the University of Sfax, which is a big university in the south of Tunisia, it has 40,000 students, or had in those days, and the rector said to me, "Give me advice on one point. How do I teach entrepreneurship? Because my students are almost to a man or a woman expecting that as a graduate they will have a government job. There are very few of them who show any interest in going out and starting a business and that sort of thing. How do I inculcate a more ambitious entrepreneurial approach?" I'm afraid I didn't have an answer for him. Perhaps somebody in this room does. But
no? Okay. Please join me in thanking our two speakers, and thank you for coming.